Say what you will about Texas Wildflower, but that was the book that kicked the door open to the next 40 years of my life. Welcome to Once Upon Our Time, a best-selling author and her daughter revisit the books, the business, and the family stories that shaped them both.
A few years ago, after I had had my first child, my only child, and she kind of got out of the super intense, hands-on phase, I found I had a lot of free time. So I started reading much more voraciously than I had in years. Then last year, I kind of started thinking, I'm reading so much and I've never actually I've read 2 of your books, 3 of your books. I've read The Canary Who Sailed with Columbus, which is a children's book. I have read The Goodbye Quilt, which is about you taking me to college. And then I've read The Oysterville Sewing Circle. Did I get the title right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Oysterville Sewing Circle, which is kind of about my divorce. So I've read the 3 books about me. And that's it. And I realized, especially I have this opportunity to read these books and talk to you about them. That's pretty cool. And I thought I should read them in order of publication, because one thing I know about you from reading, I've read clips of your other books, of course, portions and chapters, but I realize when I read your writing, I can see your life in the writing. I can hear quotes from our family members. I can pick up on moments or things that were, fascinating to you at the time and made themselves into a book. Like Fabergé eggs are always the example I use. And so anyway, I had this idea that I should be reading these books and then talking to you about them and saving it for posterity, these conversations, just because they're, I think, going to be super interesting. But anyway, why not also share it with a broader audience, I guess? So here we are. And I have read Texas Wildflower, published in 1987.
My first book.
Your very first book. Yeah, and have gone kind of deep on a lot of stuff that was happening in the world at the time. So maybe we can kind of jump in right there, which is, we've called this podcast Once Upon Your Time because every book in your catalog is a time capsule. And it kind of exists in the specific moment you wrote it, in the world as it was, your life as it was. And so I think it's interesting to talk about the whole context. So the first question I would have is just when you think back to 1983 to 1986, those are the years you were writing Texas Wildflower. I know it was your 3rd novel that you had written. What do you remember about that period of your life? What was happening? What was your day-to-day like?
I was in my 20s. I was a new mom. I was a full-time teacher, complete voracious reader. Reading was my escape. And I was gravitating more and more towards historical romance novels. They were wildly popular at that time. And so I was just wanting to follow up on my dream of being a writer, which started when I was, pre-verbal almost. I was always a writer, storyteller, wrote all through elementary school, high school. I had all my angsty journals and, I just made my life as a writer. I just wanted to be a published writer. And so I kind of found my way to Texas Wildflower because of those first 2 unpublished novels that you mentioned. I just followed something that was interesting to me, which at the time, and I don't know why, was the Dutch Revolt of 1516. And go figure, it was just something that caught my imagination. And so I wrote 2 books about it. And I was trying to sell them. I actually met with a literary agent at a writing conference, and I showed her these 2 typed up manuscripts. I had typed them because, nobody had computers back then. And she, looked at the time period and looked at the top 2 pages and said, no, I can't sell that. In fact, she actually told me that I might find my role better as a reader. And I was so insulted by that. that, and this was at a writers' conference in 1983. And I was so insulted by that I went up to my hotel room. It was in Washington, D.C. It was at the Mayflower Hotel. And I like drank half the mini bar and had unprotected sex and got pregnant. And guess what? So that, yes,
I love it.
That's your origin story.
The Dutch Revolt led to my birth. What made you want to write? Like, was it the romance that you wanted to write about, or was it the history and the time in history?
You know what? I have to say almost 50-50 both. I loved romantic stories from the beginning of time. You know, all of my favorite books had some sort of love story in them. And I was just really intrigued by and fascinated by history. And when I was a youngster in school, we lived overseas. And so we lived among, castles and ancient, cities and things like that. But the reason then I had to pick Texas, and there are a couple of reasons for that. Based on this conversation with the literary agent who rejected me, I knew that I needed to be more commercial. I didn't even know really what that term meant, but I started going to the bookstores and to the big box stores and seeing what was on the shelves. And they were all these, hot, sexy Western romances, medieval romances. There was a certain kind of vibe that they had. And I thought, well, I could write about Texas. I'm a school teacher. I teach about it all the time. And I was living in Texas. So that seemed to be a good fit for my next idea. So I completely abandoned the Dutch Revolt and moved forward with a little kernel of Texas history that is real. And I built upon that a very unrealistic but very romantic saga of Shiloh Mulvane and her first nemesis, and then the love of her life, Justin McCord, and that became Texas Wildflower.
Yeah, I was actually looking into this, to your point of the market research that you kind of did. Walter Zacharias, is that the name? Hold on, let me make sure am I pronouncing it
Yes,
correctly?
Zacharias. There's still a thing in publishing.
Yeah, his family. Yeah. But I guess he used to say, sell the sizzle, not the steak. And it sounds like
Yes.
when he founded Zebra, or when I think he may have purchased Zebra. Anyway, when he started Zebra, he apparently invested in artists to do the covers more so than like editors. And I guess a lot of Zebra books, not yours, I can attest now, having read one, were known for being full of typos and errors, because that wasn't the point. And instead, it was these books were made to go on spinner racks and to grab the attention of women who are busy, who are like pushing a stroller and at the grocery store. And so the covers were everything. And like Zebra, I guess, was Zebra was the first imprint, I think, to put a hologram on the cover. And like the foil and the colors and everything was very important. This was the rise of Fabio. So anyway, it seems like it's an interesting, it makes sense that you would go and look at sort of the commercial side of it, because that's really, I think, how the publishing industry was approaching romance at the time.
Yep. There's a reason that, the characters are depicted as beautiful, the flowing blonde or red hair and the big shoulders and everything, because the writers as well and the publishers were focused on the reader and, this fantasy element that we wanted to present. And so off we went. It was the commercial reality of the market at the time.
Yeah. And you had read, it was Kathleen Woody Weiss's, I may be pronouncing that wrong too, Shanna or Shauna? That was like,
yeah.
Shana, your first that you discovered in college. So was that your first real engagement with the genre, or that you remember?
I think it might have been. There were some precursors, the Mary Stuart Gothic romances and things like that. But the full-blown bodice ripper historical romances were the two queens were Kathleen Woodiwiss and Rosemary Rogers. Those were, the most iconic, the most popular at the time. And readers couldn't get enough of them. And that's why there was room for so many more writers to come along and join in the genre. So that was
Yeah.
probably my education was just reading these books and saying, oh, here's how it works, here's what readers want to read. And so that's how I sort of felt my way along the historical romance tropes. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, the sex. Readers picking up an 80s historical romance might be startled by the explicit sex scenes. A lot of them involved coercion, non consent, sometimes even violence. Readers definitely knew the difference between fact and fiction, but still, it reflected the cultural attitudes at the time. But here's the thing, those scenes weren't always an author's personal creative choice, at least not entirely. Publishers in that era worked from tip sheets, literal internal documents that spelled out word count, heat level, sometimes even the number and placement of love scenes per book. A working writer wrote to spec. Over the course of my career, I saw the genre evolve in real time. There's been a shift toward enthusiastic consent, more communicative characters, and heat levels that vary by author rather than by publisher mandate. My books eventually came to reflect a more honest, mutual vision of intimacy. So even though these were real constraints from a real industry, the genre kept growing past them. The changes were driven by readers, and for that I'm grateful because it opened up new creative possibilities for me as a writer.
Yeah. And so when you were writing about the Dutch Revolution,
Yeah.
did you think you were differentiating?
I did.
Or were you just
yeah,
interested?
no, I was, number one, I was interested, and I thought, well, they don't want the same old, same old. There's, any number of people writing these Western historical romances, so maybe I'll do something a little off the beaten path. But that was too far off the beaten path. For me, it wasn't, because I actually was, I had lived in Brussels, Belgium, and I kind of knew some of the history more than most people would. But that was a misstep. There's so much rich history in any time period, that you can find a little niche. And I think that's what I did with Texas Wildflower. It was during the days of the Texas Republic, which was before it was part of the U.S. And so that was the my way in. And the other thing that I can point out that I know happened with this particular book, usually a book is bought and then it takes about a year and it'll get published. But the publishers were so hungry for these books that they needed like a slew of them every month. Some publishers would publish, 4, 6, 8, 12 romance novels every month. And so Kensington Publishing, which it has the imprint Zebra and Heartfire. I don't know. They had a number of them. They couldn't get them fast enough. And so the editor who actually made me the offer for Texas Wildflower, I didn't know it at the time. She was very, very new. Her name is Wendy McCurdy. We kind of stayed friends off and on through the years. And she just retired. And I'm so happy for her that she is happily retired now. I am not, but anyway, she was the one to call and give me the news that she wanted to make me an offer on the book. And it was quite a moment because everything was by phone. I think fax machines were just getting started, but it was mainly by phone. And I got a phone call. I think you were like 18 months old or so. And so you were actually the only person present when I got my book offer, and you were toddling around in your diaper and playing with the dogs. And I remember that because the phone was a corded phone and you wandered out of the room, and I was on the phone with this New York editor, and I had to make the choice, oh, do I go see what my toddler's up to in the next room, or do I stay on the phone with the editor? And I just remember stretching the phone cord, peeking around the doorway. And yeah, so you were there when I made my first book deal. And she said,
That's so
yeah, she
cool.
said, we like your book. If you can finish it, because it was nearly finished, but not all the way. She said, we like your book. If you can finish it by Labor Day, or something like that. We'll be able to publish it next April. So this is September
Wow.
'86 to April. Yeah, they were fast. And,
Yeah.
I think what probably might have happened is another writer might have missed their deadline or something, and there was this open slot
Mm.
in April 1987, and so I said, "Sure." And and so off we went, and it was a really, really low advance. I don't remember what it was. It was like, I don't know, 1,000, $2,000. It was terrible pay, but it was my foot in the door, and there was no way I was gonna turn that down. And so that's what I did, and I canceled everything over Labor Day weekend and sat down at the typewriter and probably wrote, oh gosh, another 50,000 words or something on that book. And it was too long, it was a big mess, but, that was my way in. And I remember seeing the cover art, which you mentioned. It's very pink and feminine and glitzy, and somebody just messaged me on Threads and said, "I'm collecting all the Heartfire books, and my mother-in-law found the Susan Wiggs book that I've been looking for," and there it was. And it's been reissued a number of times with, different art, but that was the original art, and I remember being very
Yeah.
thrilled with it.
How did they show you the art? Like, did they, because, obviously they couldn't email it to you. Did they send it to you in the mail? And
Yep, you get they're called cover flats. Yeah, it was a flat cardboard, um, printed cover showing exactly what would be on the back and the spine and the front, and I was just thrilled, and it had a little Post-it note from Wendy, my editor, and she said, "I think this is beautiful, it's gonna be great. Way to go."
yeah, it looks amazing. I still like it.
And from that moment on, I knew that, the cover art on a novel was such a key element in the way the novel was gonna perform in the marketplace, and that's as true today. And when we get all the way up to my current book, Wayward Girls, we'll have a lot more to say about cover art.
Yeah, for real. Um, yeah. So, okay. Something that is notable about this book, I think that does make it stand out a bit among the historical romances that Zebra was publishing at the time is, um, it is a balance of accurate history and place, which although not having read all of your books yet, but I know this about you. I know your books are all rooted in real high stakes external um, events or places. Um, and I think it's especially interesting that you wrote this book about Texas kind of at the dawn of its independence, or as it kind of merged with the US, given that at the time when you were writing this book, Texas as a state was in deep economic crisis. Oil prices had fallen. It sounds like I read a story about developers realized it was cheaper for them to burn unoccupied condos rather than sell them, that people were in deep economic crisis at the time. Unemployment was rising. At the same time as Texas was publicly planning its sesquicentennial celebration. And so reaching this big milestone as a state and going through this really intense time set against a backdrop, actually, of national uncertainty and crisis with the AIDS epidemic and the Challenger explosion and Chernobyl. Um, anyway, it's interesting that like this was the book that you wrote at that time. And I guess I'm curious, was it escapism for you? Were you sparked by any of that? Or was it genuinely a recognition of like, well, like Westerns do well. I happen to live here, so I already know a lot.
It was a pretty cold-blooded decision, commercial decision in part, but the actual writing was an escape, and I felt really, 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 I was very affected by the Challenger, explosion, because I actually did apply to be the teacher in space because, that they announced, teachers should apply to be and I made the first cut, meaning, I got up to the final 14,000 or something like that. It wasn't gonna be me, but, I felt very invested in that, and I watched, the Challenger takeoff in a classroom full of children because we all wanted to watch the teacher in space, and we all shockingly sat there, and then I had to deal with a room full of school children, asking me very hard questions about what happened to this teacher in space. And I was very affected by that. And so, yeah, so reading and writing has always been an escape valve for me. It's interesting that we talk about, our economic times now, and we look back, and I actually remember the mortgage rate on my home was 9.75%, which would be unheard of now. And there was, like you said, there was an oil crisis, there was a job crisis. And so, I think my first salary as a teacher was around, I don't know, $14,000 a year with a master's degree. So it was,
from Harvard.
yeah, it was a struggle. And so, but one thing that kind of defines my life as a writer is I get very determined and very focused. And I'm determined to see this through. And I felt the same way about writing books. And there is some kind of creative flow that you get into that separates you from anything else. And so that definitely was a part of my dynamic, I guess, as a writer or something like that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So one thing I thought was interesting was that in 1986, apparently that was the year that the term glass ceiling was coined for women. And I think that's when this prevailing narrative of women having it all, career, husband, children, fitness, beauty, all started to really take root. Um, and so it's interesting that you really did embody that, because it wasn't just that you had the career, the husband, the child, blah, blah, blah. You are also doing another career, which was starting this writing career, on top of all of that, and kind of, doing that quote second shift, but you even had a third shift, right? And it's interesting through that lens to look at the romance genre as by women for women. And then I think about the heroine that you wrote. So she's plucky. She's trying to go off on her own. She's she's got a lot of these things of like a fierce, independent woman. And yet she's forced to marry the guy at gunpoint. And then he basically rapes her till she likes it.
Oh my God, that would never fly now. And yet I still get notes from readers about that damn book.
Yeah. Well, I mean, talk to me about, like, was that the romance that you were writing? I mean, I know that was that was kind of the formula, right? Was it was almost like a way to allow women to be sexual. It's like, well, if it's happening to her, then she's not really like doing it. She's still pure, but yeah, how did that feel okay to write at the time?
Oh, totally. I regarded it as a sexual awakening. and, and again, like what you mentioned, it's a way for a woman to, feel love and pleasure in the arms of a man and still be respectable about it, I guess. And this forced seduction stuff is so bad, but it worked so well for readers. And I think it was just because it's so unrealistic. I feel like it wasn't going to entice anybody to tolerate rape in their real life.
Right.
These books were often, denigrated, especially by a male-dominated, critics as these rape sagas. No, women know the difference,
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. There's an interview with Judith McNaught about this, and I guess in Whitney, My Love, which was like a late
huge
70s
book. Yeah, huge
yeah,
book.
it had a rape scene that I believe she rewrote potentially before publication or maybe on republishing. But what was her quote? She said, based on the very few other historical romances that were available at the time. So this was before the historical romance boom that you kind of like launched into. She said, I naively and erroneously assumed they were all writing harmless fantasy. And then she said, I had absolutely no idea back then that rape was an all too common occurrence in real life. I never imagined there might be women who would read my book and be made to cringe at the real memory of real rape. But I feel like that was an earlier wave. And I notice in yours, it's not rape. It's
no,
I mean, it is. It is.
I don't know. No, it wasn't rape. It was intense couple being intensely attracted to each other and not communicating well, and ultimately, finding their happily ever after. But I agree with that. Nowadays, a book like that, like anything that was being published at the time, would probably come with a trigger warning.
And I think be written more carefully.
Oh, absolutely.
I think it's to the point you were making before. It's like, this was a way to keep your heroine pure.
Mm.
Was if she didn't want it until someone showed her how great it was, rather than having these sort of lustful thoughts before. But yeah, I mean, he literally marries her at gunpoint in the book. It's so funny. Was
The bar was low.
I know, but you liked writing romance. So what was the appeal of romance to you as a genre, given that was kind of the trope? I mean, that's obviously the sex side. I think we're probably the emotional
Right.
side had
I
more.
was going to say every story that I have ever written or ever will write is going to have a love story in it, because I don't know, that was just what I loved as a reader, and I felt like I could capture that as a writer, and that was always my quest, is to, play up the romance. And so the sex scenes, they were never my favorite, but I knew they were, reader favorites, so I always had to make sure that they were there. And you get guidance from the editorial side with the publisher. They'll say this needs to be spicier. They've never told me to tone it down, but I've been told to tone it up. And, I was a right to order kind of gal. I was trying to be a team player and have, find my value in the company. And so that was, I would try to take their advice.
So you weren't, because I feel like sometimes I read a book and I'm like, this book started with the sex scenes. Like, this writer was writing for herself. And then she was like, hey, maybe I could turn this into something. But that wasn't the case for you? Like, the sex scenes were not like...
No, I think it started...
part of why you were writing?
I think it probably, most of them start with the clash between the two principal characters. Why are they drawn together, and what's keeping them apart? And that's pretty much the question that they wrestle with all through the book.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, listen, they're tasteful, good sex scenes in this book anyway. This is why I didn't read your books until now. Because when I was in high school, yeah, my friends would find the sex scenes and memorize lines from them. And then in just casual conversation, they would drop it. They would terrorize me with these lines. And it was so weird to me. But now that we're adults,
I love that.
It's not that weird to me.
I love that.
I know. It's pretty funny, but it is the reason that it's funny because I was a huge romance reader in like middle and high school. But I never would touch your books because...
No, that's weird.
I can't.
That's weird.
I know, but now it's not weird to me. And also, I mean, one thing that is interesting though, is as I'm reading, I hear your voice. And so it isn't as immersive, but that's kind of cool, actually. It's like, I kind of know where some of that came from, which is fun. Let's see. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, let me find my note here. So this is what I find fascinating about this book, is the world you are kind of publishing into, right? So romance in the 1980s was the most commercially powerful genre in publishing. I think I read that at its peak, something like 40 to 46% of all mass market paperback sales were romance, but it was also very dismissed, right, by the industry. It was sneered at by critics. I think serious literary people wouldn't touch it, but it was printing money, right? And so I think what that actually produced, it sounds like, but I'd love to hear how this was for you, like this dedicated professional kind of ecosystem that was built entirely by and for women. And actually, the Romance Writers of America was founded in 1980 in Houston, where you lived. It sounds like specifically because romance writers were being dismissed and kind of marginalized in general writing and publishing spaces, and needed their own organization. So I'm curious, kind of, especially through the lens of, when Kensington formed, Roberta Bender Grossman was the president of Zebra Books. She was very young to be a president. But it was notable because almost no women held that title anywhere. So I'm just kind of curious, what was your experience of that tension? And did you feel the stigma while you were writing? And what kind of a resource was RWA for you?
RWA was a really, really big organization, and they would have a major conference every year. And so it was really important to show up there. And it was a place where you could meet editors and agents and things like that, and other writers, because writing has to happen alone in a room. And so once a year, you get let out of your box. And so that was good. We absolutely felt, that we were the cash cow of the industry, but also second-class citizens. And there's been a lot written about that since. But it was definitely dominated. The editors were mostly women. Like you mentioned, Roberta Grossman, and some of the key players were women, and they knew. So there wasn't. I didn't feel a glass ceiling, but there was definitely, especially in the real world, in my real life, I taught at probably the most prestigious private school academy in Houston. And there were people who were just kind of appalled that I'm publishing Texas Wildflower, but they were appalled in a weirdly envious way. Oh my gosh, she's written a book and it got published, and
Yeah.
so I definitely, kind of fielded my share of snarky comments. When are you going to write a real book? And
Ew.
yeah, when are you going to write a real book? I'll say, no, this is absolutely a real book. And, it
Yeah.
generates real sales and makes real money. So, yeah, there's always that. Maybe there still is,
Right.
maybe there's still people who say, oh, this is just romantasy. I'm going to set it aside. It's not real writing or something, but you just kind of shrug it off. You just do.
Yeah.
You do what you do.
Yeah.
You just I'm not very distractible when it comes to my writing. I just focus on the story, on getting the words down, and so it didn't bother me. I wasn't passionate enough. I'm grateful for writers like Judith McNaught and Jane Ann Krentz and the ones who were kind of the standard bearers for the genre. And in fact, there was a compilation called Dangerous Men and Adventurous Women. And it was a conversation with romance writers on the appeal of romance. And I don't know if it's still in print or anything, but it kind of made some waves. Some academics actually embraced it and agreed that, there was something there. So, yep.
Interesting.
Hmm.
Yeah. On the topic of early readers and people in your life reading it. So who read the manuscript before it was published, or did anyone?
Nobody. It was a foreign concept. To have a critique group. I didn't know. I thought in order to be in a critique group, you had to have a published book. And so I didn't join a writer's group until I had sold this book. And then I joined a local chapter and met the women who would form my critique group through that. But before that, it was just me and Wendy, my editor. And indeed, when I have gone back and done some editing, they let me do some editing, not the heavy editing that it really needs, but they let me do some editing. And it was just so repetitive and wordy. It was really a bloated manuscript. And I'm sure, Wendy did her best to rein me in, but that was something that I grew into as a writer. I think I would call myself a writer who learned her craft on the fly, you know.
Yeah. Well, but, and also, I mean, that's not like the business model of Zebra and of Heartfire, right? I read somewhere that they basically treated it like the same, like a magazine publisher, right?
Mhm.
It was about, what's going to sell on the show. It was all about the packaging. Um, and they talk about they underpaid these writers, with the thinking being, I don't know if they were explicit about this or if it's just something that you see in hindsight, that, the real pay that you were getting was exposure, distribution, a chance to start to build a following. But did they even position it that way to you, or were they just like, this is how much we're going to pay you, deal with it?
I think I didn't even ask. I was so terrified. And another thing I should point out, and this is something that I don't recommend, is I sold this book without a literary agent. I was unrepresented, and it wasn't on purpose. I had been sending my work out to literary agents, and I never got any feedback. And I saw an opportunity to send this, they call it over the transom, like an unsolicited manuscript to a publisher. And the first time I did it, and this is a true story, first time I did it, I didn't even know where to send it. And so in the back of the Zebra Heartfire romances that I had been reading, there was a P.O. box. And so I sent it to Zebra P.O., editor or something like that.
Yeah.
And it turned out, and I sent it off and nothing. And you would send it in the mail, like a physical Xeroxed manuscript. And weeks went by, heard nothing. And then this big package came back, and it was my manuscript. And there was a note in there and said, I think you want editorial in New York. This is the fulfillment warehouse in Ohio.
Aw.
So I had sent it. I know. The bar was low. The bar was low, but that was nice enough for them to point it out. And so then I did some real research. I had to go to the library because there was no internet. Went to the library, figured out where their offices were in New York, and sent it. I don't know if I even targeted a specific editor. I said to the editors, here's my book. And it just must have landed on the youngest, greenest editor there who, needed something to do. And that was Wendy. And so I believe that's how that came about. But yeah,
Interesting.
I started
Yeah.
at a very low spot and learned not just my writing craft on the fly, but also the craft of publishing and the business of publishing. I knew nothing, but I did know after I made that first deal that I needed representation. And the agents who were all rejecting me because I was an untried, unpublished author at the time, now were happy to hear from me because I had a publisher, which made it a lot easier
Oh,
to
interesting.
sell. Yeah. And so I ended up, for my next book, which could be our next episode, I did find two literary agents who were interested in representing me, and I went with one of those, and so that was my first big step in my career after selling my book.
Oh, that's interesting because I know Briar Rose came out the same year as Texas Wildflower. So you moved quickly, it sounds like,
Oh my
to
gosh.
get the agent.
Like I said, they were hungry beasts. They wanted material, and they were some of the editors would say, they had such pressure. They would actually sometimes write alongside with the writer, to try to get something finished and get it in shape to publish. And so I think one thing that I'm guessing was valued about me is that my books were fairly clean, the writing, the grammar,
Yeah.
things like that. They were
Yeah.
better, maybe better than average. So I guess education matters.
You can see glimmers of it. Glimmers. You can see a lot of it, I think, in this first book. I mean, you have some passages that are just beautiful and kind of paint this really evocative picture. And it's clear that you did know the subject matter, but like a really good historical fiction novel, romance or no, like you bring that to life. And I mean, it's one thing I like about the historical genre in general is that you get to learn about something that really happened. And, I think you start this book with the scene of they have to draw beans out of a bag. And every 10th bean is I think white. And if you got a white bean, you're going before the firing squad. And I think that's a real thing that happened.
That happened. Yeah. It's a famous story in Texas and Mexico history. Drawing the bean, I think 10% were white beans, and that's who had to be executed.
Man. Yeah. I mean, just stuff like that. It's not present in all, especially like this mass market historical romance kind of era didn't have that level of, I guess, quality. But yours did. Now, you said you knew immediately that you needed representation after this first one. How did you, were you just aware that you were underpaid, or was there like
Yeah.
another person who told you? How did you figure that out?
Well, I was underpaid, and then I got a copy of the contract. And a publishing contract is this multi-page legal document that was really almost incomprehensible to me. It lays out the publisher's rights and responsibilities and the writer's rights and responsibilities, including translation rights and recording rights and all these other things. And I really, really didn't have a good grasp on that. And I knew it. And in Houston, I didn't even know how to find a lawyer or anybody. And so you just need somebody who's a specialist. And I knew that. So, and I probably showed that contract to the agent that I ended up working with for a number of years. His name was Richard Curtis, and he was really well known for representing extremely commercial westerns and romance and things like that. His biggest client at the time was a woman named Janet Daly, who has a whole saga of her own going forward. But at the time, she was one of the best-selling authors in the U.S., and she was his client. So he knew his way around, and he was a name, people knew who he was in New York. And so I worked with him for a number of years, the first few years until I
Interesting.
ended up with my current agent.
So you got this contract and you were like, this is all Greek to me.
Mm-hmm.
And you already knew that because you'd been trying to get an agent before that.
Mm-hmm.
How did you even know so you had these manuscripts you had written, and then who told you to go shop an agent? I mean, I will say people sometimes ask me about writing because I'm your daughter, as though I know much. I don't. But, one thing I notice is that a lot of, especially aspiring writers, are not aware of the importance of getting an agent. So how did you even know that you should?
There was and still is a really good magazine called Writer's Digest. I think it's all digital now, but it was very informative. And so they would have interviews with working writers. And I was addicted to that magazine. I'm sure I subscribed to it. I went to get it at the library. So there were a few resources, not anything like what is available now, but there were a number of resources. There was one called Literary Marketplace, and it was a publication that you could get at the library. And so I did understand that, a writer doesn't have to do it all by yourself. And so it was kind of a relief. You do surrender a percentage of your earnings to that literary agent. That's how a literary agent makes their cut, is that it's kind of like a real estate agent. They get a percentage of the sale price. And so you do that, but they're worth their weight in gold when they help you make really good publishing decisions. And I've been lucky enough to work with a couple of good ones. And my current literary agent, I think we've been together like 30 years or something. And so it's a good match.
Yeah. Yeah. No, Meg goes back.
Mm-hmm.
She's every time I research you and who's your agent, that's the only one that comes up,
Mm-hmm.
even though I know there have been others.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, on the topic of early readers for this book, so nobody had read the manuscript. You sent it in. Wendy called you. So at what point did you? Well, we'll start here. Who did you tell first, besides me, obviously?
My mom. I did.
Not surprising.
Yeah. And here's the backstory to that is I never talked about that I was writing. I never did. Nobody who knew me knew I was writing a book. Nobody who worked with me. Nobody knew. I didn't tell my parents, didn't tell anybody, and as far as my husband at the time knew, I was like grading papers in the study. And so I was just really, really on the down low about it. And the reason was I had an instinct to protect myself from too many questions, because as soon as you say, "Oh, I'm writing a book," they want to know, well, when is it finished? When's it going to be published? And they're full of all these questions, which are good, sincere, obvious questions. But I didn't want to have to answer that. I didn't want to say, I don't have a publisher. It's not published. I didn't want to be negative about it. And so I just didn't tell anybody. And so it was my mother was like flabbergasted. Well, what? You wrote a book? How did you do that? And so it was kind of fun to come out like that with a specific pub date. It's going to be published, here's the deal. And so that was fun. as opposed to everybody knowing, oh, she's writing. I canceled lots of weekends. I didn't watch hardly any TV. I just did parenting, teaching, and writing. And the writing was just kind of my little secret. And I
Huh.
liked protecting myself that way because I didn't want to go wide with the news until there was something to report. Because there's nothing more boring than talking to an aspiring writer.
Well, yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, I guess that I can see what you mean. It's interesting now in hindsight, but nobody knew where your career was going to go from there.
right.
So, what are some other memorable people who you revealed this to? What were some other reactions that you got from people in our family or in your life?
My sister and my mom were instant, fans. And I think it was either Lori, my sister, or my mom who said, of course, they knew that I would always do what I wanted to do. And so, but all of my colleagues at work, and I worked with a really social and tight knit work group at the school where I was teaching. They were thrilled for me, and so it was kind of fun. It was kind of like
Yeah.
revealing that you're pregnant or something. I don't know, just sharing some good
Pre-
news. That was good, but
Pregnant with a career.
yeah.
I love it. Now, okay, so who was the first person in your real life who did read the book?
Um, when it was published, probably my mom.
Yeah.
Yep, and she was such a voracious reader. She could read a book a day, and so she did, and loved it. And my dad read it, loved it. They had nothing to say about the sex, zero.
This is
Yeah,
my next
yeah,
question.
no,
I'm like
nothing.
trying to imagine Granby Lou
They said nothing. No,
reading Shiloh and
I
Justin.
know. No, it was weird. They had nothing to say about it, good or bad. They just said it was a wonderful book and, they were so proud. Yep. So they were actually the parents that they had been all my life. I always had really positive parents. They always made me feel like I could do anything that I wanted to do. And, I feel really lucky to have had them for parents. It's likely that I'm a successful writer because of the background where they made everything seem possible to me as a person.
Yeah, man, that's I'm now you had to have had somebody though in your life like bring up the sex scenes,
Oh
right?
God, yeah. No, most people did. Most of them are like,
Yeah.
yeah, how did you research that? And my now ex-husband, I think his stud rating went up on the golf course or whatever. But oh yeah, everybody has something to say about that. But my favorite reaction is when your friends would find the passages in my books and share those with me.
Oh yeah.
That was good. We'll have
I'll know it's probably whatever books were coming out when I was in high school, but Lily White Petals of Her Womanhood is
Oh
one
my
that I
God. Oh,
have not been
wow.
able to shake.
That will never die. Okay, that's good. We gotta use that on
No.
Clara.
I know. I know. Oh my gosh. She's unshakable though. She didn't
Oh,
care.
I
She thinks
know.
it's
I
funny.
know. She's awesome.
Yeah, I know. So, okay. Let's see. You've published now, 75 plus books, span the gamut in terms of genre, historical romance, contemporary fiction. I don't even know how I would classify Wayward Girls. You've been on the New York Times bestselling list. When you look back at Texas Wildflower now, knowing everything that came after, what do you see in it? And what do you see in that moment in your career? And is there something that feels like a seed of everything else, or does it feel like a different writer entirely?
Um, I think that I look back and I see somebody who was in her 20s who had a passion and sustained that through really the next 40 years and thank God, got better at it. That's why I got to have a career because I knew how to get better at it. And in a future episode, we'll talk about the actual teachers and writers that shaped me as a writer. And but this one was me finding my way, and it was me, say what you will about Texas Wildflower, but that was the book that kicked the door open to the next 40 years of my life.
It really did. It's so cool to read it too now, knowing what came after. thanks for listening to Once Upon Our Time. Subscribe, rate, or rant wherever you get your podcasts, and maybe tell someone who loves books or grew up with a writer.
Next week, we'll be talking about Briar Rose, a dark fairy tale with a truly bizarre reason the heroine has black hair and the hero is blonde.
And absolutely no one asked for that explanation, but here we are.
Recorded in Bainbridge Island, Ballard, and Bremerton in the beautiful Great Northwest.